I just wanted to get into one of the substantive points that he talked about, and I think it's the one that's resonated most, was his discussion, his idea of let's train our troops in what he called dangerous cities. Many people, I think, might generally say, well, maybe these cities are dangerous. The National Guard seems to be doing a good job in DC. But spell out, you commanded troops in real and actual danger. What are the dangers? Why is the success of the American military over the last 250 years predicated on not being used in that way?
Well, it's because it's the difference between a police force and a military force. And first of all, soldiers, and I'll use that generic term for all the services, soldiers do not get any training on police activities other than those who are going to be military police men and women. So you're putting an infantryman, a tanker, a truck driver in front of America's people, and that would be like saying you or I could go out and arrest people and quell riots and do all those kind of things. The military does have for its force a mission called support for civilian authorities. If manpower is needed, certainly military forces can go to an area and guard buildings, put up fences, do the kind of things that you need a lot of people to do. But breaking that razor's edge into policing activities, again, is contrary to the Constitution and contrary to our laws. So it shouldn't be done. But what I heard the president say yesterday was an implied remark that he was telling everyone in that room is be prepared to do that. And that only happens once an insurrection occurs, like during the Civil War. So unless he's prepared to stoke that kind of insurrection by further dividing the American people and it turns to violence, soldiers are the means of last resort for any kind of police activity. Primarily because they're not trained to do things like that, and secondarily because it's against the law.
You were in command of troops in many different situations. How would you deal with that order if it was to come to you? What is going to be going through the heads of all those generals and admirals, I should say, when they heard that implication?
Yeah, I believe that each one of them walked out of that room yesterday doing a personal analysis of what does this mean for me? And I know for a fact that there's talk inside the military ranks of what is the best way to disobey an unlawful order. How do you do that? And especially now, given the recent Supreme Court ruling, which holds the president immune from criminal acts, but the people he's ordering to do these things are subject to those criminal violations. So how do you say no, especially if the staff judge advocate, the lawyer chain of command has been disrupted, that the military chain of command from civilian to military leaders has been co-opted. It was obvious to me in Secretary Hegseth's speech that he also is all for doing whatever the president orders him to do. And that breaks the boundaries of what two previous Secretary of Defenses, both Mattis and Esper in the first term, when they were ordered to do illegal things, they spoke for the force and said, we don't do that. And it also goes back, Hugh, truthfully, to the Bush administration. When there was, and I was in the room when this was happening, when there was conversation about using waterboarding in Iraq. And the military commanders and the Secretary of Defense said, we don't do that. Get somebody else. So that mission was actually shuttled over to the CIA to set up the torture sites. And I'm glad that happened because it would have been a violation of land warfare by my read of the legal implications of it.
How, if you were back in uniform, how do you even begin to process that sort of? What is the analysis going to be like for those generals? Because, as you say, in previous times, the issue of unlawful orders has stopped at the point of civilian command, but bringing it down into the chain of military command, is there a precedent for this? Is this something that people have grappled with before, or are we in new territory?
I don't think we're in new territory, other than the fact that this is extremely abnormal and the consequences are greater. I've had a couple of instances in my career where I've had to go to my bosses and say, hey, I was just issued this order. I think it's either illegal or immoral, and I think we need to talk about that. And I usually have my staff judge advocate standing right next to me to give me the legal implications, although most commanders at senior ranks have legal training, certainly to take care of their commands. But in each one of those cases, and I think, looking back, I think I did it 3 times. In each one of those cases, my bosses, higher ranking officials, took my input, said, yeah, you're probably right. This is illegal. Let's change this order. I'm not sure we're going to get the same kind of action from the current civilian chain of command in both the White House and the Department of Defense.
I want to turn to one of the more kind of bizarre aspects of this Trump address was his perhaps understanding of the military, or certainly his approach to it. He talked about how he'd been a fan of a documentary series called War at Sea, which, for those who don't know, I had to check, I will confess. It was made in 1953, 1954. It was, of course, black and white at the time, and it was about the US Navy's success in World War II, and particularly focused, I believe, on battleships, which were, of course, part of the US Navy's success in World War II was down to battleships. And Trump went on about how that was what the military should be like. Now, you've a distinguished career commanding many aspects of the military. I'll just put this bluntly, is it anything like that? Is it anything like an NBC documentary from daytime TV in the 50s?
Hugh, I think I would probably not surprise you if I said there's an awful lot of people sitting in the corner chair of a bar on a stool somewhere who have watched a lot of Bands of Brothers or World War II documentaries who become experts at the military and sometimes even proclaim to the young women nearby that they are special operators or special forces when they would never identify with that. I
hope they wear beards, because
they always wear beards.
Apparently that's the tell. That's what the Secretary of
either that or a CIA agent, one of the two. But it's interesting, even what both Secretary Hegseth and President Trump have said in the past about their heroes from the war. And it was from the past wars, and it was represented in the stage they were standing on. I mean, I don't think it was a mistake. Somebody asked for that giant flag to be behind the podium because it was representative of the early segments of the Patton movie. And President Trump has said on numerous occasions that he loves that movie. Okay, great. But also even Secretary Hegseth, who he disrespected 3 general officers, Corelli and Milley, and there was one other, and I can't remember who the other one was, and then put in their place Schwarzkopf, MacArthur, and Patton.
Right.
Well, I mean, all generals have flaws, don't get me wrong. Patton, when you go into their history, was not a very good leader he was a very good commander and a warfighter. He was not a very good leader. MacArthur actually rebelled against the president. So I'm wondering how Trump would feel if the chairman of the Joint Chiefs or some combatant commander did something that he wouldn't want to do. So it's a real paucity of information on the things that they're talking about. And there was even a couple of times during the Secretary's speech yesterday where I thought he's talking at this from the standpoint of an Army lieutenant. He's not even considering the Air Force, the Navy, the Marines as part of this force. It's all directed to what his experience was in the Army. And that was really one of the things that I think alerted some people when he was nominated for the Secretary of Defense job. He didn't have the business acumen to run an organization the size of the Department of Defense. and he didn't have the experience with the services. So all of that came through, and it comes through in spades with President Trump. Talking about battleships being the great surface fleet of the U.S. Navy, and any Navy guy will explain to you why that's not such a good idea today.
And also objecting to the shape of stealth ships because he's an aesthetics guy, which I assume we're going to see our Navy painted in gold after that. I don't know. But more seriously, one of the, you talked about being in Russia, you commanded the army in Europe. What are people, first of all, what are people who are our allies thinking about this? What was the takeaway in Europe?
I won't go into the details, but I had several of my former counterparts in other militaries in Europe that I worked very closely with. We continue to stay in contact. And I got several text messages and emails yesterday asking me about what I thought this was doing to the U.S. military. And on at least two occasions, those retired generals from foreign allied forces said to me, I don't understand why this is happening given how much respect we have for the capabilities of the U.S. military, specifically the U.S. Army, who they had dealt with. Why is this even going on? We know the quality and the capability of your soldiers and your leaders, and you have taught us things. Why would they be going after you now on what seemingly to them are somewhat silly and mundane issues, as opposed to national strategy or national security strategy?